Hello everyone, I'm Maya, and this is the National Buffalo Museum in Jamestown, North Dakota. Today we're going to be learning about the last two words of that name, the buffalo and the museum, in that order. You will have to look elsewhere to learn about the national bit. The museum and I have created two little traveling exhibits to show you. The first uses items from the museum's collection and will teach you about the American bison, or buffalo. This animal is very necessary to the prairie where it lives because it is connected with and important to other species that share its habitat. This is the hero of our story, the American bison. You might be a little bit confused as to why it has two names. That's because the now more commonly used word for these massive Ice Age looking cow creatures is bison, while buffalo is more of an affectionate nickname. I'll use both words, but either way, I'm talking about this animal.
If you look at the bison, you can see how its body helps it stay alive and prosper. Its thick hair protects it from cold winters. So does the hump on its back, which lets it make trails in the snow.
Bison are so large that not many predators, animals that consume other animals, can take them down. And they make things even more difficult by traveling in enormous herds. Yet despite their size and numbers, bison eat skinny stalks of grass, about 24 pounds of it each day.
Thankfully for the prairie grasses, they have deep roots, so they're able to survive and grow back after the bison trim them. It's surprisingly difficult for many animals to eat grass, so when buffalo consume it, they change the energy and nutrients in the grass into energy and nutrients that other animals can use. We'll get back to that in a moment, but for now, let's look at the tools that bison use to do this.
Because it takes a lot of time and energy to transform grass into useful, usable parts, a bison's mouth and entire digestive system have to be pretty specialized. Let's start from the beginning. This is the mandible, or jawbone, of a bison, the part that hinges to the rest of its skull.
You can see that it's very large. It's also thick and strong because the bison has to use it for hours and hours every day. Like cows, they have 4 stomachs. Bison swallow their grass, let it mix with special fluids in their first stomach, then spit it back up for more chewing before the entire mixture, called cud, goes down into its second stomach, then the rest of the way out.
As you might have noticed, the mandible has several types of teeth. I have more samples right here. These are incisors, which are used for
Grabbing and tearing food. Like us, bison have incisors at the front of their mouth. But unlike us, they have only 2, which are right here on the mandible.
The rest of the mouth is full of wide, flat premolars and wider, flatter molars, which are designed for chewing.
Like I said, buffalo have to do a lot of chewing in order to get enough nutrients and energy from their grassy meals. Now, you might be wondering what all this has to do with bison being important to other creatures on the prairie. The reason we're spending so much time on what they eat is because changing grass into things that other animals can use is one of the most important things bison do.
Part of this is obviously because much of the food becomes buffalo meat, but the other part is this.
This is dried buffalo poop. We might not think that this looks tasty, but this stuff is a hugely important food supply for hundreds and thousands of creepy crawlies. In fact, each dropping can feed over 100 species. The bugs eat the buffalo chip, taking some of the energy that the bison transformed from raw grass. The bugs then go about their merry way until they're eaten by a rodent or a bird or a lizard or something else. What's left of the poop becomes fertilizer, helping the grass grow in a somewhat gross but completely necessary circle of life.
While one of the bison's biggest roles is transforming grass into things that other creatures can use, they also do a few other jobs. One of the ones that I found most interesting is that birds like to take buffalo fur to line their nests.
Since the fur is designed to keep bison warm through winters as far north as Canada and Alaska, it's great nest lining.
Bison can help the prairie in ways that most people wouldn't even imagine. They're quite literally part of each other.
Here is an American bison in its natural habitat. It's standing among the grass that it trims and fertilizes, probably chewing its cud. The bison and the prairie support each other. Without bison, the prairie would be a quieter, more lifeless place. There'd be fewer birds, fewer bugs, less grass, less everything.
So that's a few of the ways that bison support other creatures around them, as shown by items from the collection of the National Buffalo Museum. There are other ways too, because the prairie is a complicated web of relationships where plants, animals, and other organisms support, coexist with, and compete with one another. Bison are essential parts of many of those webs. Now that you've seen how traditional museum exhibits tell stories, it's time to look at how you can do the same thing with normal objects you might have lying around the house. My story is about bison, but yours can be about virtually anything. Some of the items you find might be pretty similar to the ones in museums. We have a toy bison in the first exhibit because it's slightly more portable than a full-size taxidermy bison, so that everything would fit in your room.
We've got a toy bison in this exhibit because it's something that people like you might already have in your home. And this exhibit is to demonstrate what you can make with items you already have.
As we've mentioned, one of the most important roles that bison play in their environment is how they provide food for other animals.
Their meat is supper for scavengers and for predators like bears and wolves.
In addition, their dung becomes food for these fellows.
Remember, one bison chip can feed over 100 species of creepy crawlies. Not all of these bugs eat poop, but even the ones who don't benefit from buffalo. The chips fertilize the plants that those bugs depend on for food.
So far, it's been pretty easy to retell the story of the bison with items like you might find lying around at home. But we know that bison are far more than just walking pantries. How can you show other things about buffalo? Or, if you're making your own museum exhibit, how can you show more complex ideas with items you have at home? The answer? You get symbolic.
Bison are sort of like nature's gardeners. They trim the grass and other plants so much that these plants have to extend their growing season. Grasses and sedges can grow back easily, but trees can't. This helps the prairie remain a prairie instead of becoming a forest.
They spread seeds, including beautiful wildflowers.
The seeds either get caught in their fur or go through their digestive systems before getting pooped out into a ready-made pile of fertilizer.
They even help till the soil with their sharp hooves. These gardening tools represent that bison do a lot of gardening work out on the prairie. But as we've discussed, they do still more than that. One of the less famous things that bison do is create tracks through the snow.
They're big and strong enough to create trails that other animals can walk through. Some people have called them living snowplows because they're so good at that. An actual snowplow is, again, too big for this exhibit, but a shovel does the same thing, though more slowly. The bison and the shovel carry out the same role.
When you make your exhibits, look for substitutes that do the same thing as the subject of your story. Remember how birds use bison wool to line their nests?
I happen to have some extra wool on me, which is why I've got another packet here. But if I didn't, I could use anything from cotton balls to dryer lint to a little blanket. Those things would require more explaining, but they could all mean the same thing.
So, even though I don't have a lot of items that look like they're bison related, I do have a bunch of things that can tell people about some things that bison do and are. I just had to get creative with how I told my story. Believe it or not, museums sometimes have to do the same thing. No museum has every single item it would like to have, so they have to use creative substitutes, or positioning, or pictures, or written information, or anything else they can think of that might get the job done. What works for museums works for you, so don't be afraid to get creative with your substitutes. When it comes down to it, both of these exhibits are good at telling stories about bison. The first shows what bison look like and how the way they're built helps them survive, while the second focuses more on explaining what bison actually do. They both work, but differently. It's a museum's job to use the artifacts in their collection to tell these stories in interesting, creative ways. You can do the same thing. Think of something that interests you, a story that you feel like should be told. Now, think of items you have at home that are either directly related to or can be used as substitutes for your story. Put them together, come up with a plan and a few object labels, and you've got yourself a museum exhibit. That's it from me and the National Buffalo Museum. I hope you've learned something interesting and, more importantly, I hope you're interested enough to keep learning.